A young woman steps into an elevator alone. She presses multiple buttons at once. She steps out into the hallway, looks both ways, then presses herself against the elevator wall as if she's hiding from something in the corridor. She steps out again. She waves her hands in front of her face in slow, fluid movements that don't look like anything a person does when they're thinking clearly. She steps back in. The elevator doors, which should have closed long ago, stay open. And then she walks out of frame. She was never seen alive again. The footage you just heard described was captured on February 1st, 2013 at the Cecil Hotel in downtown Los Angeles. It was released by the LAPD as part of a missing persons investigation into a 21-year-old Canadian tourist named Elisa Lam. Within 24 hours of that footage being released to the public, it had been viewed millions of times. Within days, the entire world was trying to figure out what happened to the girl in the elevator. And what they found when they kept pulling the thread on this story was something far darker, far stranger, and far more disturbing than anyone expected. This is the story of Elisa Lam. And I promise you, by the time we reach the end, you will still have questions that nobody has ever been able to fully answer. Elisa Lam was born in 1991 in Hong Kong. Her family immigrated to Canada when she was young and settled in Vancouver, British Columbia. By all accounts, she was bright, curious, and deeply creative. She maintained a Tumblr blog where she wrote openly and honestly about her life, her thoughts, her experiences, and her struggles. Those struggles were real, and she never hid them. Elisa had been diagnosed with bipolar disorder and depression. She wrote about it openly on her blog with a candor and self-awareness that many of her readers found deeply relatable. She was not defined by her diagnosis. She was a young woman who was managing it, living with it, and pushing forward in spite of it. In January of 2013, Elisa embarked on a solo trip down the west coast of the United States. She started in San Diego. She planned to make her way to Santa Cruz. She was traveling alone, exploring, seeing the country, doing the kind of thing that 21-year-olds do when the world feels full of possibility. She was active on social media throughout the trip, posts from San Diego, messages to friends back home. She was communicating regularly. She seemed to be having a good time. In late January, she arrived in Los Angeles and checked into the Cecil Hotel. That decision, to stay at the Cecil Hotel specifically, is something that has haunted this case from the beginning. The Cecil Hotel has a history that most hotels do not have and would not advertise if they did. It opened in 1927 in downtown Los Angeles and was originally built as an upscale establishment catering to business travelers. Within a few years, the Great Depression had devastated the surrounding neighborhood and the hotel's clientele changed dramatically. Over the following decades, the Cecil became known as a place of last resort. A transient hotel in one of Los Angeles' most troubled neighborhoods, Skid Row. The kind of place where people ended up when they had nowhere else to go. The history of deaths associated with the Cecil Hotel is staggering. Multiple suicides over multiple decades. At least 2 guests who jumped from upper floor windows. A woman in the 1960s who jumped from her room and landed on a pedestrian on the street below, killing them both. 2 separate serial killers stayed at the Cecil Hotel during active killing sprees. Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker, lived at the Cecil in 1984 and 1985 while he was murdering people across Los Angeles. Jack Unterweger, an Austrian serial killer who had convinced the European press he had been rehabilitated and was sent to Los Angeles as a journalist, stayed at the Cecil in 1991 while he was murdering women in the city. The hotel had been rebranded as Stay on Main by the time Elisa checked in during January 2013, in an attempt to attract budget travelers and tourists rather than long-term residents. The rebranding had been partially successful. There were backpackers and tourists staying alongside the hotel's more permanent residents. Elisa Lam checked in and was initially placed in a shared room. She was moved to a private room after her roommates complained about her behavior, which they described as strange and erratic. The specific nature of what they observed has never been fully detailed publicly. She continued to post on social media. She called her parents regularly. As far as anyone outside that building knew, she was fine. And then, on February 1st, 2013, she disappeared. When Elisa missed her scheduled call home, her parents contacted the hotel. The hotel contacted police. A missing persons report was filed. The LAPD began an investigation. They reviewed security footage from throughout the hotel, and what they found on the elevator camera on the 4th floor became the centerpiece of one of the most watched and most analyzed pieces of security footage in internet history. Let me walk you through exactly what the footage shows. Elisa enters the elevator alone. She presses several buttons, appearing to press nearly every floor. She steps out into the hallway and looks in both directions, left then right, as if checking whether someone is there. She steps back into the elevator. She presses herself into the corner of the elevator, partially hidden by the open door, in the way that someone hides when they do not want to be seen from the hallway. She steps out again and looks down the hallway again. She moves her hands in front of her face in slow, fluid, almost hypnotic gestures, moving her fingers individually, looking at them. This portion of the footage in particular has generated enormous discussion because the movement does not look like distress. It looks almost like she is seeing something in her hands that other people would not see. She steps back into the elevator doorway. She appears to speak, though to whom is not visible. There is nobody else visible in the footage at any point. The elevator doors, which have been open through all of this, still do not close. She walks out of frame down the hallway. The elevator doors finally close. She is never seen on camera again. The footage was released publicly in mid-February, when the investigation had not yet produced leads. Police were hoping someone would recognize her behavior or know something about what she had been experiencing. What happened instead was that millions of people began watching the footage on loop, frame by frame, analyzing every second, posting theories, building timelines, and going deeper and deeper into the history of the Cecil Hotel, the circumstances of Elisa's disappearance, and the question that nobody could answer. What was she looking at in that hallway? On February 19th, 2013, 19 days after Elisa was last seen on that elevator footage, guests at the Cecil Hotel began complaining about the water. Low water pressure throughout the building. Water that looked discolored. Water that tasted strange. Hotel maintenance was called to inspect the rooftop water tanks, 4 large tanks that supplied water to the entire building. Inside one of those tanks, they found the body of Elisa Lam. She had been in that water tank for 19 days. Every guest in that hotel had been drinking, bathing in, and using water from a tank that contained a decomposing body for nearly 3 weeks. The discovery itself raised immediate questions that investigators struggled to answer and that have never been fully resolved. The rooftop of the Cecil Hotel was not accessible to guests. There was an alarm on the rooftop door that would sound if opened. The water tanks themselves were large metal containers with heavy lids. Getting into a water tank requires climbing up the exterior of the tank to reach the lid, opening the lid, and climbing inside. Elisa Lam was found inside the tank with the lid closed above her. How she got there has been one of the central questions of this case ever since. The Los Angeles County coroner investigated and eventually ruled Elisa Lam's death an accidental drowning with bipolar disorder, listed as a significant contributing condition. The theory put forward by authorities was that Elisa, possibly in the middle of a bipolar episode or in a state of acute mental distress, made her way to the rooftop, climbed into the water tank, and drowned accidentally. The manner of death was ruled accidental. That ruling did not satisfy a significant portion of the people who had followed this case. Here's why. The rooftop access door had an alarm. If that alarm sounded, it should have been noticed. Whether it was properly functioning on the night in question was never conclusively established. The water tank lids are heavy. They are not designed to be opened easily. And critically, opening the lid from the outside and then climbing in would mean the lid would need to be pulled closed from inside the tank. Multiple people who examined the tank setup expressed doubt that someone could close the lid securely from inside, while also being in a mental state compromised enough to accidentally drown. There was no security footage of Elisa reaching the rooftop. The rooftop cameras were not functioning properly at the time of her disappearance. That detail has fueled enormous suspicion among people who believe the official explanation is incomplete. The elevator footage shows the doors not closing when they should have. Some have suggested this indicates the elevator was being held open by someone using a manual override. Others have pointed out that elevator malfunctions are not uncommon. Toxicology results showed no illegal substances in her system. Her prescribed medications were present, but the levels were noted to be inconsistent in ways that generated discussion among those following the case. The internet investigation into the death of Elisa Lam became one of the earliest and most intense examples of what happens when millions of people collectively try to solve a mystery in real time. Some of what the internet found was genuinely interesting. Researchers noted that a tuberculosis outbreak in the Skid Row area around the same time had used a diagnostic test with the brand name LAM-ELISA, a coincidence so strange that many people found it difficult to accept as a coincidence at all. Some of what the internet found led to serious harm. A Mexican death metal musician who had used the Cecil Hotel as a backdrop for promotional photos was identified by online investigators as a suspect in Elisa's death. He was not a suspect. He had no connection to her death. But the internet campaign against him was so severe and so relentless that he received death threats and was driven to the point of psychological crisis. He has spoken publicly about how the false accusations nearly destroyed his life. That episode stands as one of the clearest warnings about the dangers of crowdsourced criminal investigation without evidence or accountability. The case of Elisa Lam has never left the public consciousness. A Netflix documentary series called Crime Scene, The Vanishing at the Cecil Hotel, was released in 2021 and introduced the case to an entirely new generation of viewers, driving a fresh wave of searches, theories, and discussion. The Cecil Hotel itself was purchased by new owners who announced plans to convert it into affordable housing after decades of troubled history. The official ruling remains accidental drowning. But here's where I want to be honest with you, because I think this case deserves honesty. The most likely explanation for what happened to Elisa Lam is also the most painful one. She was a young woman living with a serious mental illness who was traveling alone in an unfamiliar city. The behavior captured on that elevator footage is consistent with a severe psychiatric episode. Bipolar disorder can produce states of acute psychosis in which a person's perception of reality is profoundly distorted. In those states, people do things that make no sense to observers but feel completely real and necessary to the person experiencing them. The Cecil Hotel had a history of tragedy that predated Elisa's arrival by decades. The rooftop was accessible, however difficult. The tank was there. The official explanation is not impossible. It is not even improbable, given everything we know about the circumstances. But the questions about the roof access, the tank lid, the missing security footage, the elevator behavior, the timeline, they have never been answered in a way that feels complete. And that gap between the official explanation and the questions that remain is where this case has lived for over a decade. Elisa Lam was 21 years old. She was creative and thoughtful and brave enough to travel alone and honest enough to write publicly about her struggles in a way that helped other people feel less alone in theirs. She deserved better than what happened to her in that hotel. Her Tumblr blog, which she had scheduled posts on before her death, continued to publish after she was gone. The posts appeared automatically for weeks after she died, her words still going out into the world while she was no longer in it. The last scheduled post published after her death contained a quote she had saved. It said simply that she was not afraid. If this case got under your skin, you are not alone. Millions of people have never been able to fully let it go. Drop your theories in the comments. Do you believe the official ruling? Do you think there are questions that were never properly answered? What do you think that elevator footage is really showing us? I read every single comment and I want to know what you think. If you are new here, subscribe to the Unsolved Vault. Hit the bell so you never miss a case. And if you have an unsolved case you think deserves to be covered, drop it in the comments below. Every case on this channel started as a suggestion from someone who could not stop thinking about it.